So welcome once again to the ClearAdmit MBA Application Overview webinar series. I'm Graham Richmond. I'm the co-founder of ClearAdmit. I'm going to moderate today's session. I'm mostly going to try to stay out of the way because we have 4 guests who I'd love to introduce, and they're going to have a lot of really insightful comments to share. No pressure, panelists. So first up, I wanted to introduce Jordan Blitzer, who's the Director of Admissions at Columbia Business School. Welcome, Jordan.
Thanks for having me, Graham. Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to have you on these. Next up, we've got Chelsea Hahn, and she's the Director of Admissions and Scholarship at Cornell's SC Johnson College of Business. Hi, Chelsea.
Hey, Graham. Hi, everybody. Happy to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Next up, we've got Madison Shields, who's the Associate Director of Admissions at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business. Hi, Madison.
Hi, Graham. Hi, everyone.
Welcome. And last but not least, we have Catherine Alford. She's the Director of Admissions at the Future Year Scholars Program at UVA's Darden School of Business. Hi, Catherine.
Hey, Graham. Thanks for having us. Glad to see everyone here and looking forward to get started.
Yeah, so we have a lot of people still kind of jumping on here, but I think we can get started. So let's go with the kind of the first roundtable question that we have. And this is, we just wanted to kind of find out a little bit more about each of your program's core values, and specifically, like, how do these values shape or inform the way that your team approaches admissions? So we'll start with Jordan from Columbia Business School. Jordan, just, walk us through this.
Absolutely. So when I received this question, I thought a little bit about our guidelines for our core curriculum for our first year MBA students, which is that they must be present, prepared, and participate. These are expectations that we have of every single first year student coming into the MBA classroom. So those are the expectations that we have for our applicants. Beyond that, we really want our applicants to be engaged, active members of our community. And we want to know how, if admitted, they would meaningfully participate. So core values, core curriculum, present, prepared, participate, and how that sort of translates into the applicant process and admitted student process. Okay, excellent. Yeah, that's helpful in terms of ways to think of it. I guess what that would be is it 3 Ps? Is that what you just, it was like sort of, which reminds me 3 Ps, exactly.
Yeah, kind of marketing class and stuff. But all right. So Chelsea, how about you? How do things work at Cornell? Like, what are the core values and how do they shape admissions?
Yeah, so I'm going to pull a little bit from the overarching university's core values, but I think, and they tie into the business school more specifically, but I think on a larger scale, excellence, inclusion, community, and impact, as well as innovation, are probably the ones that come to mind the most. Students at Cornell generally are really sort of committed to doing the greatest good. We're looking for students in the program who want to contribute to the experience of their peers, create some sort of lasting impact, and really find ways to get involved here. Where that translates into the business school and our specific evaluation process, I think we're very committed to the fit aspect of our decision-making process in admissions, and really looking for students, again, that want to collaborate and work with their peers and really immerse themselves in this 2-year MBA experience. So in the application, I typically advise candidates to be very thoughtful and intentional about their cross-cultural experiences, their diverse team experiences, leadership opportunities that they've had, of course, in their essays and their interview, but also extracurriculars, community service involvement, and the ways in which they spend their free time. Those are things that we're paying attention to.
Terrific. And you're foreshadowing a question I'm going to ask you later a little bit about fit, which is great. No, it's great, because that we're going to get really, we're going to unpack that even further. So Madison, tell us a little bit about McDonough. What are the kind of core values and how do those values inform admissions?
Our Jesuit heritage is really defining our principal leaders. We're going in and we're making sure that our applicants have this service and mindset for a greater community. We really lean into this idea of cura personalis, a Jesuit tradition, but this greater idea of caring for the whole person. How are you going to be as a principal leader tackling, really global issues around the world. So we lean into this idea of global mindset and caring for the whole person and really developing a well-rounded leader outside of just the 9 to 5 role. So going into how we inform our admissions process, similar to Chelsea, we're going in and making sure that that community fit is strong, but what is that passion and that's going to light you up while you're in our community?
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So Catherine, how about you? Walk us through Darden's sort of core values and how they shape your process.
Sure. So there are a number of core values at Darden that include the education experience, research, et cetera. But for the purposes of this webinar, I wanted to focus more on a community of belonging and a community that really cares. Hopefully for the admissions process, that's the experience our applicants have with the different touch points they have with admissions throughout the recruiting process, as well as the application. We think of it as a storytelling exercise, and we really try to emphasize a well-rounded applicants looking at all things that you're interested in, not just with professionally, but also personally as well, and trying to really capture who you are as a full person through the application process.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's helpful. And I think, what I wanted to do next is actually kind of step back a little bit and just, because so many of the folks joining us are just kind of embarking on the application process. So I thought it'd be useful for them to get a sense of like, what are the components that go into applying to business school. And I recognize that not every school asks for all of these items, but these are kind of the most common things. There's usually an application form, and you have to provide transcripts from your undergraduate or any other graduate studies you've pursued. Most programs allow for, or in many cases require, a standardized test, a resume, essays or short answers, recommendations, and all the other things you see here around interviewing and in some cases language exams for those are candidates who are non-native English speakers. So these are kind of the basic components. But what I thought we could do for this next sort of segment here is talk about each of your individual applications a little bit. And, again, as I just pointed out, like at a high level, a lot of these requirements are the same. But I feel like, from talking with you all over the years, each of you has a slightly different process. There are different things that you're doing, whether it's just the questions you ask or even some of the components in your application process. So I thought we could kind of go through and talk about this. And so what I've done is we've prepared a slide for each institution. So starting again with Jordan at Columbia, these are kind of the requirements that you all had last season. And, I presume a lot of them are going to stay the same, but not necessarily. I know that most of you don't open your applications online until the summer, but in any event, these were the components. And I just wondered if you might want to talk with us about something that, one of these components or some aspect of your process that you just wanted to highlight.
Definitely. So, by and large, what was listed on the previous slide is pretty much what the Columbia Business School application looks like, but more specifically, everything is listed here. Thank you for that. I think what's different about not necessarily it is applicable to our application process, but we have 2 different intakes, which is not something that everyone is aware of. We have the traditional 2-year MBA, which is August entry, where you do a year, a summer internship, and then a year. But then we also have our January intake, where students start in January and go through for 16 months, all the way through completing the MBA degree. So our January application is actually about to launch, hopefully within the next couple of days. Our August application will likely launch in mid-July. But we actually tweaked our essay questions from last year to this year, and they now are publicly available on our website. But I thought it would be fruitful for me to use this time to just talk a little bit about the 3 essays that we chose for this year, and a little bit why we chose them. So essay 1 has not really changed. We ask you about your professional goals, right? What do you want to do for the next 3 to 5 years? And what's your long-term dream job? So that has virtually stayed the same, and probably for obvious reason, we want to get a sense of why you want to use, what you want to do with the MBA and why you feel you need it and how it's going to help you in your future goals. Essay 2 is an essay we previously used, but we decided to bring back again this year. And it's around how folks are thinking about being inclusive. So we have a co-curricular program, Phillips Pathway for Inclusive Leadership. It was designed to ensure that every CBS student develops the skills that they need to be inclusive leaders. There are 5 pillars that go with PPIL, is what I'll refer to it as. And we ask our applicants to tell us about a time when they were challenged against one of these 5 pillars, and how the actions that they took to overcome that challenge. We want to get a sense of, your lived experiences, what you've done and how you've come up against some of these things and how you challenged and what the outcome was. And then E3, we also have used previously. And it's really a way for us to get to know like why you think Columbia Business School is a good fit for you academically, culturally, and professionally. So new essays for this cycle, 2 intakes. Thank you for making those notes on the slide as I was talking. But the other key piece that's different about us is we have rolling admissions, and that's the last bullet on this slide. So for January intake, when the application opens, you could hit submit and you would get a decision, on a rolling basis as opposed to waiting for the deadline for that. So those are some of the key differentiators about CBS. And hopefully that was fruitful.
Yeah, no, that's incredibly helpful. And I'm really, it's great to know that there's some changes to the essays. I know people are always kind of curious about that. So, they can obviously go and check that out on your website. But yes, I do recall that second essay from a prior year. And I think that's a really interesting topic that you brought back. So that's great. Does this mean that the song, book, movie one is gone this year? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
much to my chagrin, we have retired the favorite book, movie, or song. For now, maybe it will make a comeback, as these have made a comeback.
Yes.
So you never know.
All right, excellent. All right, so let's move on. Chelsea, tell us a little bit about Cornell and the Johnson application process. I mean, again, we have a slide here with your main components, at least the components you use this past cycle. So feel free to comment on any changes or just anything that you wanted to highlight about your process that makes it a bit different.
Yeah, happy to. So a little bit probably shorter than Columbia's updates, because our actual requirements and dates for entering 2024 won't actually be available until the middle of this summer. So what you see here is what we've used this past season, but I can certainly talk about some of the ways in which we're a little bit different than some of our peers, and likely that some of those things may carry on through to the next season. The first one I would highlight is related to the standardized test. That's probably the biggest difference for us. We do allow applicants to submit a request for a GMAT or a GRE test waiver with their submitted application. So there's not a pre-approval or a pre-screening process for that. You have to submit it with your completed application on the application deadline. The standardized test waiver is certainly not for everyone. That's why it's a request for a waiver and not just an automatic waiver. Really, applicants should be thoughtful about their academic profile without the standardized test data point. So what does your undergraduate GPA look like, a graduate GPA if you have it? What are the types of classes that you've taken, the quality of the institution, what was your major, any non-degree coursework that you've taken, anything that you're doing quantitatively in your professional work experience. Those are all of the data points that we're going to take a look at to try and get an understanding for your academic readiness. And if you look at all of those data points and you feel like, yeah, I'm in a really good place, I have a great GPA, I studied something, STEM related or quant in nature, I think they should have a good sense for my academic readiness minus the test score, then you can go ahead and be prepared to submit with the request for the waiver. If not, though, and maybe you studied liberal arts or something a little bit less business related, then that's typically when I advise candidates to be prepared to sit for the exam. The other area that we're maybe a little bit different is related to our interview process. So maybe we're the same, maybe we're different, but many programs do offer an open, self-initiated interview period. Our interviews at Johnson are invitation only. They come out on a rolling basis after the application deadline. They can be done on campus or in person here in Ithaca or virtually via Zoom. And then the last thing I would say is related to our essays, which are, they've been here for quite a few years. So I'm hoping that they'll carry through for this year. But again, TBA on what our essays look like this season, but they are very intentional. Our goals essay is fill in the blank. It's very specific. And that's because we want to make sure that we're a program that can provide you the platform to transition into whatever it is that you're looking to do. So we really want to get a clear sense for your post-MBA aspirations. And then our one essay is really fit-based, trying to get a better sense for your potential contributions as a Cornell MBA student here.
Okay, that's perfect. I had one just really quick follow-on question. So when it comes to the standardized test waivers, you mentioned, you submit the application, and if you choose to ask for a waiver, you would do so at that time.
Correct.
If the waiver isn't granted, does the person then have the option to go and take the test and submit it, or are they just sort of out of the process?
No, that's a great question, Graham. Thanks for asking that. So if you are not granted the waiver after your application is sort of initially reviewed for that, you would be marked as incomplete. And then we would reach out to let you know we need a standardized test in order to move you forward for review.
Okay, got it. That's super helpful. Thanks for humoring me on that one. All right, let's move on. Madison, tell us a little bit about the process at McDonough, and again, something that's maybe different, or that you want to highlight vis-a-vis your peers, or any changes that you foresee coming down the pipeline for this season.
So again, we also announce all of our changes and reevaluate our application towards the end of the summer. So I would say look out for August on any announcements. But in terms of what we've done doing differently this cycle, we did also offer test waivers. We have test waivers for our full-time and part-time programs. Our program to apply with a test waiver is a little bit differently. If you're looking to apply for a test waiver for our full-time program, you do have to apply before you submit your full application. This lets us know and help us, the admissions committee, review if you're, meet all of our criteria and quant abilities based on our policy, and give you enough time to either sit down and study for that exam or kind of self-assess from there. Now, if you're trying to apply for our part-time programs, whether it's our Flex in person or Flex online, you are able to apply and self-assess if you meet our quantitative policies at the time you submit your full application. Again, we would be reviewing you in the admissions committee if you meet those standards, and we would have to flag you if, say, you don't. But at that's the differentiation with our test waiver. So full-time, you have to apply beforehand before submitting that full application. And our part-time programs for both our in-person and online, you can submit it when you send in your full application. I would say the other areas of distinction with our application is definitely our essays. So we provide you with 3 prompts. And it's not supposed to be a trick question. We only really want to make sure that you submit one written essay that's really to make sure that you're speaking really fully and genuinely on the prompt that speaks to your experience, whether that's based on your principal leadership experience, how you are an active community member, or what kind of global mindset you'll bring to our program. We really just want to make sure that we're speaking to your strengths. And then usually we take an evaluation of it at the end of the summer. So again, keep an update and a lookout for any changes in our prompts. And then I would say one more area of distinction would definitely be our interview. We also do this by invitation. We have been traveling and doing this in person a little bit more, as well as doing more virtual options and continuing with that process. Yeah.
Terrific. And I guess you also have a video essay, right? So when someone, and that's part of the application. So like as they apply, they have to, is it asynchronous? Like it's just sort of the computer asks them the question and then they record it and it gets uploaded into the file. Is that how it's done?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we provide you with a prompt. So you're going in and filming the video. It's supposed to be 60 seconds with a prompt beforehand. This year it's what gives you passion outside of your work. So really trying to get to know what you love to do, what's your hobby, what's bringing you that spark of joy outside of your 9 to 5. We have changed it up from previous years, but that is definitely an area that we love to see something new about you that we can't learn off your resume or your work experience.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for filling that in. I was just kind of curious about that.
Yeah.
All right. So Catherine, you've been patient as usual. Tell us a little bit about the process at Darden, anything you want to highlight that's a bit different.
Sure. So I would say for highlighting what's different, we also offer a test waiver option that needs to be submitted prior to submitting your application. It's about a 2-week review period. So for those who meet the criteria, looking at demonstration of quantitative aptitude, we are willing to waive a standardized test requirement. So for those who are taking standardized tests, we're pretty test flexible, and we'll accept all of the tests that are listed here. In terms of our essays for the 2023-2024 application round or application year, we're going to be most likely leaving our essays pretty much the same. There'll be a few edits, but they're going to be very similar. So one essay prompt is going to focus on what's something you would want your classmates to know about you that's not on your resume. So again, trying to get to know the full person and interests of yours that are not solely professional or academic. Another essay prompt is going to be around inclusive leadership and looking to hear an example of a time that you created an inclusive space for others to come together. And then lastly, there's going to be an essay prompt around your career goals. What are you hoping to do with your MBA and why? We have limited or reduced our numbers of letters of recommendation requirements to only 1, which is nice. And then we also have an early action round for those who know that Darden is their top choice. You can apply early action, and there's a binding option and a non-binding option. So binding is saying, I will withdraw my application from all other schools if I'm admitted. Non-binding does not agree to do that, but does show that Darden's top on your list. And the benefit to applying an early action is that if you apply in that round, you are able to schedule your own interview, and you do not have to wait for the admissions committee to invite you to interview.
Okay, and I guess now maybe it'll be hard to do this, but I'm just thinking that, so you have early action. I know Columbia has early decision. I believe Chelsea, doesn't Cornell have an earlier round as well, or am I not remembering that right?
Graham, we used to have one for our 1-year full-time MBA program. We
okay.
now do not anymore.
Okay, so it's just okay. So Virginia and Columbia have this kind of early offerings. Do you guys? I know that you maybe haven't published this yet, but do you have a sense? Catherine, and then maybe Jordan, like what's the timing for the early action, like the rough deadline?
It'll be similar to last year's, and so for last year, ours was September 7th. So around that timing, beginning of September.
Okay. And Jordan, when can people normally start applying early decision for Columbia?
Yep. So our deadlines will hopefully be released next week. So more to come. But
okay.
You can anticipate, similar to what Catherine said, deadlines will be consistent from previous years, more likely than not. And our application for August entry will likely open in mid-July. So that's when people can start to apply.
All right, excellent. Yeah, sorry for putting you guys on the spot. It just occurred to me that just ballparking, when this stuff happens is useful for everyone that's tuned in today. All right, let's move on. We have some good questions that have come from attendees to these events. And so we're going to start with you, Jordan. And this is just a, kind of a general question. And obviously, time permitting, we might let others kind of piggyback on what you have to say. But the main question here is just, MBA programs are pitched as this great place to like make a career change. But I just wondered, do you have any advice to someone who's really trying to make a significant shift, like someone who's doing, maybe changing both industry and function? Yeah, so your thoughts on this?
Definitely. And it's pitched that way because it's true. It is it's a great way to make a hard career change. I think my biggest piece of advice is to do your diligence. And then once you've done that diligence, to make sure that in some way, shape, or form, whether it's through our essays or in the interview process, you make sure to showcase the fact that you've done that diligence. And what the plan is, right? For us, as I mentioned, SA1 is like, what is your 3 to 5 year plan? And then your longer term plan, and then your dream job. Like, use that space to talk about the work that you've done and the research that you've done and what you've learned to make that pivot. I think also in doing your diligence, you'll learn pivot feasibility. you know, anything is possible, but there are certain industries that have sets of criteria that maybe you haven't yet met. I'm thinking, for example, we hear often from some of the big tech companies for product management roles, they need to see a minimum of 3 years of work experience, right? Like if you haven't met that minimum yet, you would learn that in the diligence process, but it might not be the right time for you to apply to business school, because no matter how wonderful you are and how well you do in the classroom, if you haven't met that requirement for an employer, they aren't necessarily going to look at your resume. So again, doing your diligence, and you can do that via talking to us and our teams, or at least I can speak for Columbia and say my team, through talking with current students who maybe have done a similar pivot, even if it's not coming from the same industry as you, like went into the industry you're looking to go into. And then of course, connecting, if you have an alumni network at a specific school or know anyone, alums are great too. So do the work and then showcase that you've done the work to us, to sort of convince us that you're able to make that shift.
Yeah, I think you're making a really good point about just in terms of generally like part of the application process, I really think should involve talking to current students or alums or just like doing that, like you say, due diligence to better understand what it is that you think you want to do and to understand the steps that you'll need to take to get there. So having those conversations is really important.
And also, sorry, just to add, you made me think of something else. We're assessing not only whether it's feasible for you to make a career shift and pivot, but also if our schools are the right places for you to do that. So in the diligence process, you'll also get a sense of like a school maybe you had your sight set on and thought was perfect for you, maybe has different resources than another school. That might then be a better fit for you. So again, the diligence will serve you well across for multiple reasons.
Yeah, great point. Anybody have anything they wanted to add to that, or should we move on?
I would just add that while an MBA is a great place to go to make a big pivot like that, sometimes it's important to be creative with how that pivot might take place. And instead of it being your immediate goal, sometimes it's smart to say, I'd like for this to happen immediately, but I also realize this might be a longer term goal. And these are some steps I could take to help get ready to make that move. So if it's not the first thing I do, maybe I'll start off in investment banking before I move to private equity to help build my skill set in that space. So be flexible with the path that you are planning to take to reach your goal.
Okay. Yeah, great advice. I can think of, yeah, that's a really important point. All right. So let's Chelsea, I had kind of foreshadowed this earlier, but I wanted you to talk about fit and kind of tackle this next question, because, you know, whenever you go to an admissions event, I think applicants hear this term fit, you know, what's your fit with our program? And so I just was wondering if you might be able to kind of shed light on like, how do you go about deciding whether someone's the right fit for your program?
I would love to. And I think it ties into the earlier question that you had asked related to each program's core values and sort of what types of students are thriving in their different communities. And at a very high level, most programs do want students that are going to fit their type of culture and students that are going to actively contribute and get involved and do well there. When you're trying to get a sense for which type of school would be a good fit for you, because fit goes both ways, right? So you have to fit us, but we also have to fit you. When you're thinking about your needs and what you're looking for as an applicant, I typically advise applicants to start with location, size, and sort of culture related to like, is this a cohorted experience? Are you sort of a smaller networking type of environment as part of a very large MBA class? Or are you maybe getting to know all of your different peers because this is not a cohorted based experience and you really have an opportunity to diversify and network with all of the different students in your program? So starting with those sort of aspects of the type of business school experience you're looking for can help you narrow in on a potential list of programs to start. After that, I think it's important to ask a couple of questions in your head and start to talk to students, start to do admissions events and chat with members of the community to learn more about the actual culture. And some of those questions, what are the school's core values, as we had already talked about? What's the classroom and environment like? What's the teaching style? How do students work together or lean on each other during the recruiting process? What do students do in their free time when they're not in classes or recruiting? At Johnson, we're really looking for all of our applicants to have a really good sense for those types of questions when they approach our application and our interview process. On our end, when we're assessing fit, we're really looking for that to come through most in the essays, the admissions interview, but then also in, as I mentioned earlier, your extracurriculars and the ways in which you spend your free time. That will give us a good sense for your potential contributions as a potential member of our community.
Okay, yeah, well said. I think, you're kind of reminding me of something, which is that on the candidate side, assessing fit is really important, but I think it's also, it requires some work, right? I think, back to Jordan's point earlier, like I think, talking with alums, talking with students, you have to do that due diligence, because you don't want to show up in an interview for one of these programs and say something like, why is this a good fit for me? Like, that's not the question you want to be asking your admissions interviewer. You should already know that by having done your homework, whether it's talking to alumni or students, or even, you can do a ton of research on the web to find out, as you say, about all the program and extracurricular offerings and things on campus. But did anyone have anything else they wanted to talk about when it comes to fit? Again, Kelsey, I thought you did a great job covering this, but is there anything anyone wanted to add? All right, let's move on then to our third question that came from the audience. And this one is a classic. It's about essay writing. I think, for those of us in the workforce who haven't had to write anything for, at least anything of this nature, kind of creative writing or, responding to prompts and as a part of an application process, it can be really daunting. And so just wondering, Madison, do you have any advice for candidates about like where they should start? Because sometimes it can be really daunting. You sit down with the application and you're asked these like broad questions about why an MBA or why, what you want to do with your life or why this school. So any advice for someone just kind of getting started?
Absolutely. That reflection period can be a little daunting, as exciting as it is to sit down for the chance to go into an MBA. When you have to sit down and actually articulate it, it can be a new challenge, going back and brushing off that creative mindset, and especially pitching yourself. So what we like to recommend is sitting down with a close mentor, a close supervisor, someone who may actually end up being your letter of recommender. Talk through some of your successful career accomplishments, but also how did that stand out during your period of life in that time. You want to make sure that you're speaking to essays that are genuine and authentic, and being able to really have a bounce board is probably going to be the most helpful way to start coming up and brainstorming ideas. Writing that first essay, that first draft usually isn't the right one that you should, submit. Have a couple of different people review it, close friends, close mentors, but also make sure you're writing the right school in that essay as well. That is something that kind of gets overlooked. But we also want to make sure that we understand you're keeping your options open, but making sure that you're writing it in terms of how you see yourself at that community. So going back into that community fit and understanding where you see yourself really thriving in that, whatever that essay prompt is about.
Excellent. Anyone else have any kind of quick like where to start when it comes to essays or advice they wanted to share?
I like to say don't overthink it. You're not applying to get a PhD in English literature. You are just answering a question. And a lot of doing well in business is related to being a clear communicator and being succinct. And so if you can really focus on the prompt that the school is asking, they've chosen that prompt for a specific reason. There's content in your response that they're hoping to learn about you. Make sure you're answering the question and don't spend too much time sweating over whether or not your essay is going to be submitted for an essay award competition.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, this is not a master's in creative writing from, or English literature or whatever. This is business school. And that's not to say that your essays can just be all bullet points or PowerPoint or something, but, it's still, answer the question. Great advice. Anything else on this one before we move on? All right. So our last question question, which is for you, Catherine, is about additional materials. And this sounds like a very specific question, right? But it's something that comes up a lot. So people, they press submit, they've got their app in, and then they take the test again and they want to submit a new score, or they get promoted at work, or something happens in their life that they think is material and that they should alert you about. What's the policy at Darden on this? Like, is there, once you submit, you just have to sit tight, or how does it work?
So this is kind of that gray area, right? At Darden, we're willing to accept additional materials. We don't guarantee that they will be reviewed in the review process if they're late, but we're willing to accept them, and they're usually reviewed. I can't think of a time they haven't been, but it's also up to the savvy applicant to know how much is too much. Please don't send updates every week after you've submitted your application. But if there's something really significant, like a standardized test score, then I would go ahead and send that into the committee after the deadline.
Okay. And I know that this varies. And I know also, in some cases, people are placed on a wait list, in which case the rules change. And there's there's a more of an open door policy often for updates and things. But it does sound like there's some flexibility, at least at Darden. Do any of you have different policies or want to share kind of your policy on this? Because I know this can be quite different from school to school.
Yeah, so my recommendation is to just let us know. Sending an email to our general inbox like, hi, I was promoted last week. I know I submitted my application a month ago, but thought it would be important to highlight. We can always make note of that in your file. We can't guarantee that it's going to be a part of the assessment process. That in that case, I would probably have waited to actually submit until you know that that promotion has gone through and that you have it. But it doesn't hurt to at least ping us and let us know. And then to your point, Graham, the waitlist is sort of a different can of worms that different schools are going to be able to advise more closely around, like what is allowed and what is not allowed in terms of additional materials for that.
Okay. Yeah. And just to underline Catherine's point about, just being savvy and knowing when, like, you don't, the idea is there's a deadline for a reason. You're applying, you're supposed to have all your stuff together at that point. But Madison and Chelsea, what's the policy like? Because I know, and I don't believe that this is the case with any of you, but I know of at least one school or two that are sort of have a very strict policy. It's like, hey, whatever's here by the deadline is what we're going to review. And if you don't, we're not going to take into consideration additional materials. I know, obviously it sounds like in the case of Columbia and Darden, there's some flexibility in terms of a willingness to read stuff, but no guarantee that it'll make it into the, the file. But yeah, Madison, let's start with you. Anything that in terms of how McDonough does this?
To a Darden as well as Columbia, in the sense, get everything in before the deadline. But any large merit, reconsiderations and improvements, please flag them to us. Again, it's not a guarantee, but it does help strengthen your application should, you really rock that retest, that retake on your test score. So we'd rather know and have it on your file than regret not sending it.
Okay. Chelsea?
Yeah, pretty similar. The only additional thing that I would say is if your application is complete when you hit submit on the deadline, depending on how quickly your application is reviewed, you should be prepared to potentially receive your admissions decision before you actually are giving us these updated materials, unless you're communicating to us that you would like us to hold on your decision because you're planning to submit something over the next couple of weeks. So just wanted to flag that because we do release decisions pretty much on a rolling basis. So you could actually get your decision before you submit your updated news, unless you tell us that it's coming.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it is important for people to keep in mind that, you guys start reading when the file is submitted. And so there can be, they may be too far along by the time that comes in. Actually, though, you've just made me think of something else, which is in some instances, folks come into the admissions process and maybe they've taken a test and they're not happy with the result, but they want to submit because the deadline's coming. And so they submit, and they might even write an optional statement that says, I'm not satisfied with my result on the GMAT or GRE. I know that I can do better. And I've actually signed up to take the test in 3 weeks. And I will be sending that score along. Is that something that you guys see? Is that allowed? Again, it sounds like no guarantee that you would be able to include it because it depends on where they are in the process. But would you prefer to know that? Like, would you prefer that someone says like, yeah, I'm not happy with this score and I've actually signed up to take it again and I'm going to be furnishing you with another score? Or would you rather just get the raw materials and then have that score come in whenever it's ready?
So we actually ask in our application, I don't know if every school does this similarly, but in our test score section, we ask if you're planning to retake the exam. And if so, what's the anticipated date of the retake? And then we leave that up to the candidate. If the answer to that is yes, and there is a date that's given to us, we will actually proactively reach out to you and say, hey, we noticed that you're planning on retaking your exam. Would you like us to hold you for review until we receive your updated score? Or do you want to be moved forward now with the score that you already have?
Okay, show of hands. Does anyone else have that in their file? Like a question about a retake? You do. Georgetown does. Okay. So, but I guess, yeah, let's real quick, Jordan, do you guys, I mean, does this happen? People say they want to take it again and then they furnish you with another score and that's okay.
It happens. Again, back to what I said before, like we can't guarantee that it's going to be a part of the evaluation process. But knowing that it's happening is helpful. But I have to be honest, like there are a lot of instances where people do submit and say that, and then they don't actually end up taking the test. So our team has to continue with the review. And so it's not that we're not trying to be applicant friendly. It's just, we need to render decisions, right? And so it is to your advantage, I would say, as an applicant to try and do the best you possibly can before you hit submit, at least for Columbia, as opposed to trying to then take the test again a couple of weeks later, because there's just no way for anyone to guarantee that it would be evaluated.
Okay. And Catherine, I see you nodding a lot along with
Yeah,
this. So that sounds like you're the same.
With what George said, the general rule of thumb is apply when you feel like you're going to be the strongest candidate. So if you think you need another test to be a stronger candidate, then you should wait. Although I know we are a little bit more generous in early action. Sometimes people really want to get their application in before early action, but they're not happy with their test score. I much prefer to see the applicant who says, I'm not happy with my test score, so I plan to retake, versus I'm not happy with my test score, so please look at other parts of my application. Because I admire the grit and the work ethic to try and take a test again, because we know that's not fun. But I would say, to Jordan's point, I'd say about 50% of the people who say they're retaking and provide a test date, a range, actually do retake, and about 50% don't. And so since you really don't know if they're actually going to retake, you can't make any decisions based on that.
Got it. Okay. I appreciate you guys letting me go down this rabbit hole. I think it's just probably useful, especially because the test, for those who are taking a test, is probably top of mind right now as they're beginning to embark on this process. And I think two key points stand out to me. One is, I feel like, it's never a bad idea to plan to budget some time for a potential retake even before the deadline, right? So this idea that, you may not do the best that you can do the first time you take one of these tests. And so sometimes taking it more than once is a good idea, or at least knowing that that's a possibility. And then the second thing I would underline is, I don't think I would promise the committee that you're going to be sending another score unless you really are. It sounds like a bad way to, I just wouldn't do that. So anyway, all right. So we have one kind of section left before each of you will bounce off into individual breakout rooms. And just so our audience kind of understands, again, each of our panelists is going to host an individual Zoom for you to ask them questions about their program. So that's why we've been kind of having you hold your main questions during this session, because each school is going to bounce off, and we'll get you links to each of their Zooms in a few minutes here. But before we do that, we have kind of one more round of questions, and this is just meant to be kind of for fun. And we'll go backwards through the alphabet. So Catherine, we're going to stay with you. For one, for once. So describe your admissions team in 3 words.
Thoughtful, caring, and fun.
Okay. Now, Madison, how about you? What would you say about McDonough?
And personable.
Can you say those again? I just missed the first one.
Sure. Sorry about that. I was doing it the unmute. I would say innovative, welcoming, and personable.
Okay, great. Chelsea?
I think we are dedicated, approachable, and funny. I laugh like every day. They are so funny.
Excellent. Jordan, how about you?
This is the worst to go last. Everyone.
I know.
Mine. So mine were approachable, committed, and focused.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I recognize these are unfair when you have to go last because everyone uses up all the great adjectives and things. But all right, so the next lightning round question we have is, and I think, I feel like maybe it was, I don't know if it was Madison or Chelsea that mentioned this earlier, but like, this idea of like putting the wrong school's name into an essay that you're writing is like a classic no-no. But can you think of something else that you don't like to see when you're reading files? And again, we'll just, we'll go back the other way. So Jordan, start us off here with this one.
Don't just say things you think we want to hear.
Okay, great advice. Chelsea?
Mine is maybe a little bit more tactical, but I really don't like when I see dates that don't align or make sense, or like timelines that don't correlate. That gives me a lot of questions more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think what you're referring to is, there's the resume, there's the application data form, and the moment that like something doesn't line up and you're forced to play detective, it just, it takes time out of the review process that you otherwise could spend, enjoying that person's essays or whatever. So great advice. Madison, how about you?
It's a little obvious, but the way things come in order and application components, definitely read the directions.
Yeah, follow instructions. I mean, this is kind of a classic thing. And I don't know if it's because each of you do things a little differently and people get lazy and they want to just sort of like do it one way for everyone. But I used to read files at a business school, and it's, you notice it when someone's like using some other school's kind of directions or they just not following your instructions, and you can only assume that it's because they're doing it for some other program. So, all right, Catherine, something that you don't like to see.
Yeah, it's basically what you were just saying, just lazy and sloppy. If you feel like you can't put your best effort toward a school's application, maybe you're applying to too many schools. And where I see sloppiness is taking essays that you've written for other schools and just pasting it in another application. We know what our peer schools are asking, and so it's easy to detect when an essay was written for another program. And then the same vein, I think resumes are frequently thrown in at the last minute, and people use the resumes that they're using to apply for jobs, and it should look a little bit different for MBA programs. And there's lots of advice out there on what your resume should look like for MBA programs. So spend a little bit of time thinking about your MBA resume and knowing that it's a little bit different from your job search resume.
Great point. All right, so our last lightning round question before we send you off into your individual breakout rooms is, and we'll stay with you, Catherine, to go backwards through the alphabet again. This is just, tell us about something that you're looking forward to on campus that you wanted to share with the audience today.
So, it's funny that the timing of this webinar with what's happening on the Darden, we say crowns, it's the UVA thing, but just finished graduation. So now everyone's just taken off for the summer. And so I'm looking forward to the next thing that's coming up, which is our International Student Orientation, which is in July, when everyone returns and the hustle and bustle gets back and the energy returns to the grounds.
Got it. Yeah, I guess we're sort of entering a quieter period. Let's see. So Madison, something that you're looking forward to on campus.
FXO cohort. Well, it might be a little bit virtual. We'll have our first residency, and I'm really excited to be, finally meeting people in person.
Excellent. Chelsea, anything happening at Johnson on campus?
Yeah, similar to Darden, our graduation is actually this weekend. So right now it's grad week. So these are like not things that I can join or participate in, but they're doing such fun things. Like there was paintball yesterday. Today they're kayaking out on Cayuga Lake. There's like wine tours. There was movies on the quad the other night. Like just so much fun happening this week. And it's just nice to observe.
Yeah, that's definitely a great time on campus. And Jordan, we'll wrap up with you. Anything that you're looking forward to happening at Columbia?
Yeah, so because we have students who enter in January, we actually have students on campus over the summer. And so that means there are classes in session over the summer. And selfishly, I'm excited about that because that's when I get to go sit in on classes and my team can sit in on some of the classes. So I'm looking forward to seeing what's fresh and new in the MBA classroom.
And I guess that means that if someone's coming for a visit, they can sit in on class even in the summer. Is that a fair
Yeah.
assessment? Like that's
Yeah,
open?
our class
Yeah,
visits
okay.
to prospective students will be launching in the next week or two.
Okay, great. So I think that's all that I needed from you in terms of panelists. So I wanted to thank Jordan, Catherine, Madison, and Chelsea for taking part today. We're going to send them off into their individual breakout rooms, and we'll give you the links to those breakout rooms in the chat momentarily. You will also get an email with links to the chats because you can only be at one at a time, but you can go into one, ask a question, and then move on to another. So hang on to the links once you get them. Again, you'll have them in your email inbox as well as in the chat here. But I did really want to sincerely thank all of you for taking part. It's always a pleasure to do these. And so we're going to let our panelists drift off into their Zooms.
Thank
while
you.
Sure, thanks. And everyone just stay here with me for a minute in terms of our attendees. I did want to talk to you about one thing while we give our panelists a moment to get set up so that you all don't show up in their Zoom rooms immediately. I just wanted to make sure that everyone who's tuning in today actually knows about the Clear Admit MBA Admissions podcast. I presume that some of you do and that some of you are here today because of it, but I think that it's possible that a lot of you have not listened to it. It's a podcast that Clear Admit runs. I actually host it with Alex Brown, who's a colleague of mine here at Clear Admit, and it comes out every Monday. So there's literally, I think we have not missed a week for 4 years or something. So there are hundreds of episodes that you can listen to. And what's great about the podcast is that we talk about real candidates and their profiles and, the trials and tribulations and challenges that they may be facing as they apply to business school. So it's a great way, almost like a case method way to learn about MBA admissions. I think that the reviews and ratings that we've received on Spotify and Apple and elsewhere speak for themselves, but really encourage you to just add this to your list of podcasts that you tune into. Again, we run an episode every week. We talk about real candidates, and we've also done a number of episodes where we interview folks like the panelists that you saw today. So we've done a whole series of admissions director Q&As where, we've interviewed, I guess, almost every kind of top MBA program's admissions director. We try to catch up with those people fairly regularly. So those are in there as well. You can browse the back catalog at clearadmit.com or wherever you get your podcasts. So just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of the podcast. The other thing I was going to say is please head off into the individual breakout rooms. We're going to give you those links now. I know that Jordan, Catherine, Madison, and Chelsea are excited and ready and waiting to answer your questions about their programs. This is a great time of year to conduct that due diligence and get yourself ready for the application process. So thank you so much to everyone who joined us for the main session today. Again, check your emails for the links. We'll put them up here in the chat. And it's just been a real pleasure to host this. And I want to sincerely thank everyone for making time. I know you all have busy days, mornings, evenings, wherever you are in the world. Always appreciate you making time to join Clear Admit for these events. So thank you very much. And we'll see you all soon.